this afternoon, Sri Ravenshaw, my other friends on the dais, and distinguished delegates to this very well-acclaimed conclave. Let me first of all pay my Shraddhanjali to this great leader of Odisha, fondly remembered as Utkal Kesari, Dr. Harekrushna Mahtab ji. He has an enduring legacy in modern Odisha, and that is well known. At the same time, he had a lasting contribution on the socio-economic landscape of the entire country, both as a freedom fighter and a social reformer. He is well known. Let me, to start with, quote a young scholar who was written on Harekrushna Mahtab, assessing his contribution to the socio-political life. Let me quote, "His life serves as a philosophical testament to the principles of social justice, collective identity, and the ethical responsibilities of leadership." He goes on to say, he helped to cultivate a collective consciousness that transcends individual aspirations in favor of greater good. These two sentences, in a way, summarize Dr. Mahtab's contribution to our society, to our community. But I'm not going to assess all of his contributions. I'll just pick up a small aspect of this assessment, and that is Dr. Mahtab's style of leadership. Let me propose before you that Dr. Mahtab embodied a style of transformational leadership. This, in a way, defies the symbol of Utkal Kesari. Kesari implies a lion. He was not fierce like a lion, but like a good leader, tried to transform the society. It has three components. He could inspire his followers and tell them to transcend one's self-interest for the betterment of the society. A transformative leader also pays attention to the critical needs and concerns of the community. That is, he inspires, he motivates for the community to be creative. And thirdly, he motivates the followers towards achievement of goals by giving them a new perspective. These three aspects of transformational leadership: one, idealized influence; second, the motivational influence; and third is the intellectual influence, giving a new perspective. I'll quickly touch on each one of these, not elaborately because of the time constraint. I'll just give a few examples from his life to suggest that he was a transformational leader. When you look at his idealized influence on the people, and Mahtab worked with people at the grassroots level, also people at the highest level of leadership. He always worked like a skipper of his team, and also he was a role model not only for his team, for the rest of sporting community. By sporting community here I mean people who were managing the freedom struggle of the country. He provided a vision and a sense of mission, instilled pride amongst his followers, gained respect and trust. Whether he was negotiating with Cripps mission or he was trying to negotiate with Gurjat kings, he exhibited this style. He was liked by not only Mahatma Gandhi, but also by Subhas Bose, both diametrically opposite leaders. It is Subhas Bose who invited him to be part of the Congress Working Committee. He was a co-prisoner with Jawaharlal Nehru, Patel, Abdul Kalam, and several others. He interacted with them not only in the badminton team, but also in their philosophical musings in the evenings. What I'm trying to suggest here is that he had the capacity to mingle with different types of leaders as well as grassroots workers. In fact, the last two British viceroys, Lord Wavell and Lord Mountbatten, they were full of regard for him, so much so that Wavell wanted to include him in the interim government, which he had to politely decline. If I quote Professor M.N. Das, who has written extensively on Dr. Mahtab, to quote, he says, once Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel paid his compliments to Mahtab by saying, not that Mahtab loved Odisha less, but he loved India more. He was a colossus, not only in our province, but also the entire nationalist freedom struggle. Let me share with you something that is being of late researched. His relationship with Jawaharlal Nehru. You might have known that after Jawaharlal Nehru became Prime Minister, actually even before independence, he was at the helm. He used to write letters to the chief ministers. Many chief ministers did not reply, they simply accepted what Nehru said. But it is Mahtab who always replied back presenting his own point of view as a leader of a region, and that is Odisha. These letters are now available incidentally in Nehru Memorial Museum Library. Somebody who has done a bit of research on this, I read his conclusions on this correspondence and why Mahtab was writing back, explaining his position in Odisha as a leader. This author writes, Mahtab personified a kind of federal nationalism from Odisha vis-a-vis New Delhi. He also illustrates a Congress system. Students of political science would know what a Congress system is, that some type of internal opposition within the Congress party. This was well before he formed Jan Congress. He presented the views of a regional leader, the views of Odisha, that the Nehru's vision of Indian nationalism is not the same thing as we view in Odisha as kind of Odishan nationalism. At that time it was called Odishan nationalism or Odia nationalism, I would say. And one of his conclusions, also let me quote, Jawaharlal Nehru's liberal humanism, secularism and socialism appear dimmed in Harekrushna Mahtab's responses. If Nehru oversaw the political relationship between nation and citizenry, Then it was premiers like Mahtab who formed the pivotal intervening state layer. Incidentally, there are a lot of issues with regard to law and order in the states. Nehru felt that it is RSS, the right-wing people, who are creating problem. But Mahtab presented his view and he suggested it's the left-oriented people, the socialists and communists, they are the ones who are presenting this. Nehru was, as you know, was a kind of had a bent of socialism. So therefore, this type of tussle, if you so like, was going on when Mahtab was representing the regional identity. Mind you, till this time, the idea of, or the notion of identity did not emerge. But Nehru, at that time, soon after independence, he was not in favor of linguistic, provinces. So therefore, he wanted something like a Western European nation state. He could foresee the flaws in Nehruvian style of nationalism. This was perhaps in anticipation of, I would suggest, Odia Asmita that we are debating so much today. The second point, inspirational motivation. Mahtab was not simply dominating as a leader, but among the grassroots workers, he was also a worker like other workers. He always provided a dignified meaning to people's fight against the British and thereby generated new challenges and new enthusiasm. Mahtab asserted, let me quote from Mahtab himself, that true progress is measured by our ability to empower the oppressed. This resonates profoundly in today's discourse on social justice, highlighting the ethical responsibility of individuals and institutions to actively confront and dismantle the structures of oppression. Many of you may know that Mahtab himself took many members of the depressed classes, Dalits, to his family temple in Agarpada and made them to go and touch the gods and goddesses. He did it. At that time, perhaps he was a radical leader, but also he was a sensitive leader. I'll give you two more examples quickly to say that how he was both radical and sensitive. One is, of course, the Salt Satyagraha. Mahatma Gandhi, as you may know, had this famous Dandi March in 1930. But well before that, before 1925, Mahtab had impressed upon Mahatma Gandhiji that he has to do something about the salt law, because Odisha was affected by salt law, particularly people living in coastal areas. And he made it a point to see that a village in coastal Balesur called Inchuri made the focal point of Salt Satyagraha. He made it a point to see that the other leaders from Cuttack and other areas, Puri areas, are taken there, and they are the ones who made a very successful attempt to lead the Satyagrahis, and even British government had to concede that Odisha's Salt Satyagraha was much better than what we found in other states. And Mahtab himself writes that Odisha's Salt Satyagraha in Inchuri stood second only to Dandi in terms of popular mobilization and around the salt issue. He writes this in his own autobiography. And though he belonged to a Jamindar family, he also organized the farmers, organized meetings with, I'll make one last point, organized meetings, organized state-level conferences of farmers and made them aware of their own rights. I'll make one last point. Of course, I know my colleagues are much better qualified to do that. But then I must mention the third aspect of transformational leadership, that is the intellectual stimulation. Mahtab's ability to stimulate the ability of the intellectual ability of the grassroots workers, and his simple mode of communication to generate a spark thinking of followers. This is what is crucial for a student of media to understand today, that for him, political communication of various types was important, whether it is through his newspaper Prajatantra or his other papers, including a weekly called Rachana, where he tried to imitate Mahatma Gandhi's Harijan. But through his books on history, through his writings, through his philosophical explanations, he always tried to communicate with the people and suggest that there is an intellectual dimension to the freedom movement. Dr. Mahtab's overall intellectual approach was to understand the past to shape the future. When we were children, the only well-known history book on Odisha was that of Dr. Mahtab. He stressed directly and indirectly the importance of recognizing the historical context in forming our collective identities. His philosophical reflections were used as a social tool to underscore the critical role of community empowerment. He asserted, let me quote Mahtab again, that knowledge must be a means of liberation, not just a pathway to personal success. So therefore, when we look at his dynamic leadership, we can say with some confidence that he adeptly navigated the complex relationship between nationalism and regionalism, advocated a synthesis that celebrated the diversity while fostering unity. He always wanted a cohesive identity for India, but at the same time, he expected a recognition of our regional identity, cultural plurality, and the principle of unity and diversity. So therefore, Dr. Mahtab, as a transformational leader, had an idealized influence, had a motivational leadership, and also had an intellectual influence on the masses. And therefore, to conclude, I would say again that the characterization of Dr. Mahtab as Utkal Kesari, that he was a lion, he was not as fierce as a lion. He was perhaps a lion who can carry his team together. Perhaps he could prod people to follow certain line of action, certain line of freedom movement, certain line of social development. This he was able to do, and therefore he was more than a lion. Perhaps he was a leader of the masses. With these words, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to